encounter. We can get into that. But prior to all of that, what really pushed you into this topic, wanting to look into Sasquatch?
Well, after the Patterson film, like my bio says, it really sparked an interest in me, and pretty much all my life, I watched as many TV shows and documentaries and read as much as I possibly could, on the phenomenon of Bigfoot. And as I got older, of course, the internet came along, and that opened up a whole new, variety of areas that I could go for doing research online concerning Bigfoot. And so, I did as much as I could on there, and I still do. But I figured that I needed to actually get out in the field and start looking around for myself, because I knew that there were quite a few reports here in Ohio of, Bigfoot sightings and encounters. And, I had heard about the Ohio grassman and things. So my wife and I got together and we started going out and doing things. And one thing led to another. And on June 6th of 2013, I had my sighting. But I've always also been interested in anthropology, paleoanthropology, and primatology. So I started studying those areas a little bit, in an effort to try and piece things together as to what, these creatures could possibly be.
Well, tell us about your encounter that happened back in 2013. What were you guys out doing? And if you would, for the audience, just walk them right into it.
Okay, well, it's kind of a long story. It starts off, in the morning. We were invited to go on a research outing in Carroll County, Ohio, and it started off on a Saturday morning. And my wife and I got to the research area about 9:30 in the morning, and we were met there by another researcher who had beat us, to the research area. And I didn't even get the car stopped when he came running up to us, and he's actually pounding on the window and said, "You got to see this! You got to see this!" I think I found a footprint. So Sue and I got out of the car, and we gathered up a few things, and we went up into the woods, probably 300 yards away from where the base camp was going to be, and maybe 45, 50 feet up into the woods, and right next to an old rotten stump up there was indeed what appeared to be a footprint. And it was actually pretty deep into the ground. It was about 2 inches deep into the ground. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that footprint was 13 inches long. And it actually showed, I don't know if you know anything about, Dr. Meldrum talking about mid-tarsal flexibility. And the pressure ridges, that certain types of substrate will present when the creature moves forward. But it actually showed that in this footprint. And you could actually see where the toes had kind of pushed down into the mud from the top down. And that was a really very interesting footprint. So we were there looking at that, and in the meantime, one of the other fellows showed up with his son, and we were checking things out. And the other researcher, he was actually, at the time, he was the lead researcher. He sent his son back to the truck to get some casting material. And as he did that, he walked about 15 feet further away from the initial cast, or the initial footprint there, and he found another footprint. But this footprint was different. It was only 9.5 or 9 inches long. I think it was 9 inches. But the really peculiar thing about this footprint is that it had an elongated middle toe. Really strange.
That is strange.
Yeah. And so, but it wasn't as, deeply impressed into the ground either. Now, prior to us going there, it had rained really hard for about three days. And that allowed the ground to soften up quite a bit. So normally we never probably would have, seen any traces of tracks in this area. But the reason we were there in the first place is because the property owner had a lot of strange things going on around his house. Something would come down about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and just pound the heck out of the side of his house. And by the time he got outside, whatever it was already gone. And this fella actually had a hybrid wolf. And that dog was afraid of nothing. But he went out one night after, I guess his house had been pounded on, and he tried to find his wolf, and it was cowering underneath a porch, and he couldn't get it out. So he asked us to come and investigate things. But anyway, going further along down that day that leading up to my sighting, we went out and we did some more research, and we found a few kind of fresh tree breaks and things. And later in the afternoon, the landowner came down, and he had some rather large ATVs that he used to do some trail riding on there, and it was kind of a two-person thing. So, and of course, I have MS, and I don't get around as well as the other folks. So I asked him if he would take me for, a ride on the ATV so I could, actually look around, take my camera and things, and see what I could see out there. And, he agreed. So I got on the back of his ATV, and we went up over top this ridge line, and on the back side of the ridge is a swamp. And on a previous outing, one of the researchers in the group we were in was with him, I believe it was, and another fella on ATVs back there at night, and it's very, very dense foliage back there. And they were sitting there with the engines off on the ATVs, and they got growled at. And I guess it was an extremely deep, low, guttural growl. And so they didn't waste a whole lot of time. They got out of there. And so we went down and we went through the swamp, and of course we didn't have anything happen there, but I was able to see, what it was like back there. And so instead of going back over the ridge line, we went across the back side of it, heading north, and then we went over top of the ridge on the far end of his property. And as we got close to the nearing the end of the wood line there, or tree line, or in the woods, there was a tree laying down across the trail, and it was probably about 3 to 4 inches in diameter, and it was still a fresh tree, still had green leaves on it, and so you could see like the root ball was pulled up on this tree, and it was just laying across the trail. And we thought that was pretty odd. So we got around it, and we went back to base camp, and one thing led to another, and we all did our thing for a while, and then later on in that night, we decided that half the team was going to go up and walk the ridge line and see if they could see anything up there. And while I was back at the base camp with the property owner, his wife, and my wife, and I asked him if he would once again take me back into that swamp with my audio recorder, because I wanted to see if I could pick up, any audio because of, what had happened on the previous outing there. And he was really hesitant. He was scared to go back there. But I finally did get him to agree. So we got on his ATV, and we went back over top of that ridge line. And when we got about halfway down the back side of that ridge, he stopped the ATV, and he said, Dan, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I really, really do not want to go back into that swamp. I just don't want to do it. And I was pretty disappointed, because I wanted to see if I could get some audio. But, I agreed. I said, okay. And he said, well, why don't we just, go back the same way we did earlier today, on the backside of the ridge line, and, go back to base camp. And I said, okay. Well, we started back, and about, maybe 50, 75 feet from where we had turned there to go down the backside of the ridge line, we drove into the most putrid, nasty, foul smell I'd ever smelled in my life. And he stopped the ATV right there, and we just sat there for a minute, and I looked at him, and I said, I kind of don't think we're alone here. Well, I shouldn't have said that, because that really scared the crap out of him.
Yeah.
So he hit the gas on that ATV, and he's on the two-way radio, and he's talking to the guys up there that are walking the ridgeline. He said, well, we drove into this, nasty putrid smell, and it's really nasty, and all this kind of stuff, and it lasted for about 150 feet, and the guys up on the ridgeline said, yeah, we can kind of smell that a little bit too. So we got back over the ridge line, and we came back down to where the tree was laying across the trail earlier that day, and there was another tree laying on top of that one. So that was, really, really strange. And then again, there again, it spooked him even more. So, we went out around that thing, and we were probably doing, I don't know if ATVs can do 200 miles an hour, but if they can, we were doing it.
Yeah.
So we beat it back to base camp there, and we got back, and, he's on the two-way radio talking to the rest of the team up on the ridge line. And, he's telling them all about, everything that we'd, smelled and seen and everything like that. And so the guy that was the team leader was up there on the ridge line, and he asked him to come up and pick him up on the ATV. Oh, he didn't want to do it. I mean, he just did not want to get on that ATV and go up in there. But they finally talked him into it. So he gets on his ATV, and he's taking off. I mean, he's just really flying. So he's gone for about 5 minutes. And my wife and his wife and myself were sitting at base camp right there by the fire. And all at once, we could hear what sounded like bipedal footsteps just inside the tree line about, maybe 100 yards away. And I looked at the ladies and I said, "Did you hear that?" And they both said, "Yes." So I grabbed up my night vision, and right there in the base camp, there was a pavilion. So I walked up real quick to the corner of the pavilion, and I leaned up against one of the posts of the pavilion, and I started panning from my right to left because that's the direction of the travel. And when I got to about my 10 o'clock position, I saw this thing. And it was standing in between a rather large tree and a sapling, and it would sway from side to side and stop. Then it would sway from side to side and stop. And when I first saw that thing, I said, "Oh my!" And when I said that, the two ladies got up and they ran up to my side. My wife had a small flashlight, and she handed it to the property owner's wife, and she was flashing this flashlight up there, and she could actually see the shadows of this thing swaying from side to side. In the meantime, my wife was on the radio trying to contact the rest of the team that was up walking the ridge line and stuff. And as luck would have it, they were on the back side of the ridge line, and the radios would only go kind of like line of sight. So after a period of time, of watching this thing sway from side to side, I just looked away for just a split second. And when I looked back, it appeared to be gone. Well, in the meantime, my wife was able to get hold of those guys, and they were beating it back to base camp. And so we thought that the thing was gone. We really did, at least I did. And so the property owner's wife got hold of the team leader and took him over to where I was standing and pointed up in the area where, we saw this thing in between a tree and a sapling. And so he grabbed his night vision and he started looking up there. And after a few seconds, he said, "Hey, Dan," he said, "grab your night vision and come here." So I did, and I went over there, and, he said, "It's, kind of like up where this tree was and the sapling and all this and the bushes and stuff." And I said, "Yeah, up in that area." He said, "Well, I think there's still something there. There's something still there." He said, "But I think it's squatting down." So I got my night vision again, and I looked up there, and sure enough, that son of a gun had either come back or it squatted down, but it was still there, and you could see it moving a little bit. And so he got on the radio again. He's yelling for the rest of the team to hurry up and get back to base camp because he wanted to try and go up into the woods and get a good look at it, And so they hurried up and they got back to base camp. And as soon as they started up into the woods to go try and get a better look at this thing, I could see through my night vision some movement, all the branches and bushes and things going up over the ridge line where that thing was, it was getting out of there. And that was basically the end. But we have like 4.5 minutes of audio, the last 4.5 minutes of audio where that encounter took place.
That's an amazing encounter. It's scary, especially when they're on your property. I think for a lot of people, when they're, for guys like you and I, it would be kind of, I don't want to say fun to have it on your property, but it'd make it a lot less work instead of going out trying to find areas where you think they might be. Compared to you, and I know you're a pretty big guy, what was the size you think on this creature you're looking at in the woodline?
Well, I'm about 6 foot tall and I weigh about 250 pounds, and this thing would dwarf me. I would say it was between 7.5 foot tall, I would say the shoulders were 3.5 foot wide, 3 to 3.5 foot wide, and probably weighed anywhere from 400, 600 pounds. It was pretty immense. It was just huge. And by the way, the next morning, we walked up into the area where we saw that creature, and all the grass and weeds and stuff right there were all trampled down.
Did it worry you at all having that creature? You guys were basically, it's a Mexican standoff. You're looking at it, it's looking at you. Were you worried at all?
At the time, no, not as it was happening. Because everything was so intense and you're so excited and you don't, the fear did not hit me until it was over with. And we closed everything down for the night and went to our tents. And that's when it sunk in, to me. And I was actually, my wife, she just conked out and went right to sleep, and I couldn't do it. I was sitting on the end of we had an air mattress at the time, in our tent, and I just sat on the end of that air mattress for Lord knows how long, and I kept seeing this thing over and over in my head, trying to rationalize what I had actually seen. Now, I'd always wanted to see one, but I don't think I was really prepared to actually see it at the time.
Yeah, you kind of have one of those moments that hit you where you think they're real. You have a moment, I would imagine, of studying this for so long where you're pretty convinced they're real. And then when you see it, you have that moment of, holy crap, I can't believe this is real.
Exactly.
Did anything else happen while you guys were there?
Not that night. Well, I can't say that. I believe there were, after the sighting and everything, and it had gone up over the ridge line, we heard a lot of coyotes going crazy. But other than that was just about it. So we have, I'm sure you've heard quite a few accounts of where, coyotes seem to be in the same area as a Sasquatch. But that's what happened afterwards. We heard, like a pack of coyotes going nuts. But as far as, the Bigfoot or, anything else occurring that night, no, not really.
How long did you guys stay there?
Actually, we went it was just like an overnight trip just to see what we could discover there. And so we went on Saturday morning and we were to leave on Sunday. Prior to packing up and leaving Sunday is when we went up and found, the grass and stuff all trampled down. So it was only an overnight thing. And, how fortuitous for that to happen, because you and I both know that you can go out in the woods 1,000 times and never see anything, but birds. And for that to happen was just, miraculous to me.
Yeah, it's always when you least expect it.
Right.
When you're not really expecting anything. I wanted to ask you about the smell. The smell that you smelled, can you describe it to the audience who maybe haven't, smelled that before?
Yeah, to me it smelled kind of like a cross between rotten eggs and a dead animal. Just really putrid. Almost make your eyes water. It was really nasty.
And that's how a lot of witnesses describe it. I've had some military insiders on the show in the past, and I know a lot of researchers say it comes from the armpit. I don't think anyone really knows where it comes from, but, gorillas, they'll have this smell they put out, this scent they put out. And I've had military insiders say it actually comes from their crotch. It comes from the armpits, but it's actually emitted mainly from the crotch area, and it's glands in their crotch. It's amazing to me that they can put off this odor. You hear witnesses talk about it. And I've always wondered, is that odor something they're doing because they're afraid? Or is it just, what causes them to dump this odor off? Do you have any theories on that?
Well, I think that it is, quite possibly put off to deter, someone or something. There are creatures out there in the insect world that put off nasty, foul smells, and that will deter a predator and things like that. So it may be a deterrent to try and get people or other creatures away from them.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe it's a deterrent. It's some sort of deterrent. I've come across it in different witnesses talking about it. I wanted to ask you, the property owner at the home, does he still have activity going on to this day?
Well, I couldn't tell you if there's anything going on that property anymore or not because those people moved out of there. I believe after that sighting and stuff, and I have to tell you, when that happened, he was absolutely freaking out. When he got back to base camp and all that was going on, he was just a cussing and a swearing and, oh, I don't have my gun and all this kind of stuff. But I think it probably freaked him out bad enough that it wasn't very long afterwards that they sold the place and moved out of there.
What did he think was going on when it would come up and slap the house?
Well, you know what? At first he had no idea what was going on. And then I guess he had heard or read someplace that, Sasquatch had been known to pound on the side of people's houses and stuff. So, he contacted the group that we were in. And, that's when they decided they wanted to go investigate this area. So he had really no idea what was going on. But when the people came out and they started seeing, the broken trees that are twisted, and there also let me also add that in that general area there were an abundance of deer kills with their necks just viciously twisted and broken, and their bellies ripped open, and the hearts and livers were missing. Also, his neighbor had a 500-pound pony, and the pony's head was twisted and twisted around, and the neck was broken in the same manner. So, when he started putting all these things together, he started thinking that, maybe this is a Bigfoot, and then that's when he started calling people out to investigate things. So. At first he didn't know, but then he started putting things together.
That's normally how it goes. I've had a lot of witnesses on the show in the past. I've actually talked to more on the phone than I've actually had on the show. And a lot of witnesses, they'll report that, but then they're really unsure. I mean, there's a funny story I've told a million times on the show about this old lady out in Texas. And she said that these three black guys would throw rocks at her house. They'd bang on her house in the middle of the night. And she'd go out with her 45 and start popping shots off. I mean, this is an old woman. And it makes me laugh, but it's funny. It's like, well, why do you think it's three black guys? And she said that she saw them one night retreating back to the forest, and it's night after night after night, month after month after month after month. And you would think for people in those situations, I guess if you don't believe in Sasquatch, that's the only thing that makes sense. It has to be people messing with me.
Sure.
I wanted to hear on some of your theories on Sasquatch, what you think it is. I'm always interested in hearing people's theories. I know you've been doing this for a long time. And you've studied anthropology. You've been a student of the sciences. What's your take on what Sasquatch is?
Well, for a long time, I was, in the same camp as a lot of people that believe that it was, possibly an extremely large great ape, Gigantopithecus. And I believe Dr. Meldrum was at one time as well. Of course, the theory is that they came across the Bering Land Bridge during the last ice age, and then once, the big thaw came, they were, trapped here. But as I, got into it more and more and more, I started leaning towards it being possibly a relict hominid or an undiscovered hominid, and I'll tell you why. First of all, and it hasn't been this long ago that there was a scientist in China who took one of the teeth from a Gigantopithecus, and he did a chemical analysis on this tooth. And what he came up with was that during the end of the last ice age, when the climate started to change, the food supply of Gigantopithecus, the normal food supply, I should say, began to disappear. And in order to be able to supplement that, they started eating extremely acidic fruit. And what he said was this acidic fruit actually rotted the teeth of the Gigantopithecus to the point where they could no longer, chew or eat the tough, fibrous foods that they needed to maintain that enormous body size, and that attributed to their extinction. And that made sense to me. That made a lot of sense to me. So I started looking in other areas, and then, of course, I've spoken numerous times to Dr. Meldrum and Esteban Sarmiento and some other folks, and I have a good friend who's an anthropologist, and so I started looking into the possibilities of this being a relic hominid, or a descendant of an early hominid. Now, I just recently posted a photo of Dr. Meldrum with the gigantic Bigfoot skeleton that they made. Now, in order to come up with the size and the proportions that they needed for that skeleton, what they did was they took the most complete skeleton of a Neanderthal that they could possibly get, and they upscaled it. They made it bigger. And then Dr. Meldrum took the skull of Paranthropus boisei, and he capped off the top of that skeleton with a Paranthropus skull. I was speaking with him, and he said, he said, I'm kind of leaning towards this being a relic hominid or a hominid that has evolved over a period of time. And he said, of course, we all know that Paranthropus was bipedal. And so, of course, yeah, right, it was bipedal. But then I started thinking, Paranthropus died out about 1.6 million years ago. We think it did. Okay, we think it did. And for that creature to evolve, in my opinion, for that creature to evolve from 4.5 foot tall bipedal early hominid to an 8 foot tall gigantic hominid would be just unbelievable. So what I've been thinking is, what I believe is there's the out of Africa theory where Homo ergaster, or they also called it the African Homo erectus, came out of Africa, and they believe that Homo heidelbergensis split off from that. And once these creatures got up into Europe, some went to the northern or the western part of Europe, and some went to the eastern part. And then, they believe that there's a possibility that they evolved into the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. But prior to these creatures coming up out of Africa, I believe that there is quite possibly yet another split in the evolutionary tree where these creatures, the Sasquatch, evolved along their own lines over a period of hundreds of thousands or millions of years, and they've just never been discovered.
It is interesting. It's interesting to look into it. One of the things for me, when you look at the early hominids, we tend to think, I guess scientifically now, they put them in the same category as humans. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, Dan, is when you hear about their behavior being very animalistic, like the growling, I don't know that anyone could really duplicate that growling. I mean, I couldn't. I've heard the growling before, and there's no way I could duplicate it. I just don't have the lung capacity but it sounds very animalistic, or, banging on houses, throwing rocks at you, the swaying back and forth as you described in your own encounter. That's kind of a very non-human primate. Well, I guess even humans do it, but for the most part, I think of like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. Right before they attack, they start swaying because they're agitated. Or would you put these things along the lines of more human or more animals, and why?
I would have to say that they are probably closer to human. However, they do show characteristics of some of the great apes in some of the actions that they take, like you just alluded to there. I believe that the rock throwing, the tree knocks, and some of the growls and the vocalizations that they make, they do tend to make you think that they are like a great ape, along those lines. So, it may be something that is still carrying some of the traits of a great ape from way, way back in time. But if you stop and you look at all the foot casts that we have, those feet are very similar to a human's that is just flat-footed. I have posted also, and then a lot of people think that, well, a Bigfoot has that trait of the mid-tarsal flexibility. Well, yeah, quite possibly they do, and Dr. Meldrum has, done quite a bit of research on that himself. But I think it's 1 in 13. 1 in 13, I believe it may be. Humans have the same condition, where the front of the foot stays on the ground as the heel rises. So it's not just a Bigfoot trait. It can be found in humans. And so you also look at the position of the toes. When you look at the foot of let's say a mountain gorilla, the toes are not all in line like ours are.
Right.
So it's more of a human type foot. And the bone structure would be very similar to ours in the way that it, is put together and everything. But that is another thing that led me to believe that it's probably a hominid of some type.
Yeah, and there's no wrong answer. It's like I always say on the show, I don't have one in my garage I'm studying, so, I know as much as the next guy.
Right.
But, you're right. When you do look at the foot, I will agree with you on that, and I've thought about that before. I have 3 cast prints right here in my office, and I'm looking at them right now, and you're right. They look like gigantic human feet. They don't look like a gorilla's foot, or they don't look like a chimpanzee's foot. They do look very human-like, just on a larger scale.
Exactly. And if, when you see examples of the mid-tarsal flexibility, you have to keep in mind that the substrate or the ground has to be just right for that to show up. Like the Patterson cast, I think it was Bob Titmus that took a cast a day or two after Roger and Bob Gimlin saw Patty, and he went out there and he took some casts, and it's actually the cast that Dr. Meldrum uses in his lectures, talking about the mid-tarsal flexibility. But you can see there's like a ridge in that footprint. The front half is, kind of, flat on the ground. There's like a ridge or a hump in that cast, and then you've got the heel. Well, with the mid-tarsal flexibility and the ground being just perfect, as Patty propelled herself forward and the heel raised up, the front of the foot actually pushed the earth back and made that pressure ridge right there. And the human foot with an arch won't do that. So, that's something that I thought was very interesting also.
Yeah, that is interesting. I just had a guy on, he's from California, but he was talking about his mom. A snowplow had actually hit one of these creatures, and his mom worked for the Forestry Service. She worked for, I'm trying to think of the different names of, she would go out and put these animals down. Any horses that got hit, she worked for the reservation. Anyway, they hit this creature, so she gets called out. So she loads up her dart gun, and at first she thought it was a gorilla. She thought maybe a gorilla had gotten loose, and she estimated the weight of this thing being between 600 and 900 pounds. Mm-hmm. Well, her gun would only go up to 600 pounds. And as she walked, she kept her distance. Anytime you want to tranquilize an injured animal, she thought it had broken its leg. And as she walks up, she hits it with the tranq gun, right underneath its armpit. And what bothered her when she looked at it, she said that the face was very human-like. It was on obviously an animal's body. I mean, it had, it was, I say animal's body, it had hair, it had 2 hands, 2 feet. But she said that she hit it with the tranquilizer and then she was assisting another officer. And I'll send it to you, Dan, but it's kind of a long story. I think there was some infrasound going on. This gentleman's father went along with his wife to the scene of the accident. And he was saying what was interesting is he was watching it from a distance, and the dad said, yeah, it definitely had a broken leg or a broken pelvis or something because it hit the snowplow as it was going across the road. He said it would slam its fist against the ground, and it was gibbering and muttering and making all these strange vocalizations. Well, when she hit it with that tranquilizer, it reached over, grabbed the needle, yanked it out of itself, and then threw it. What's your take, though, when you start, I don't know how many, you've probably spoken to a lot of witnesses. When I speak to witnesses, I try to get as much details as I can out of them on what they saw. It's not a perfect science, but, when you talk to people, I started finding a lot of differences depending on the region a person's in. And it's not exact, but generally speaking, there is differences depending on the region someone's in. Let's say like the South or on the East Coast or on the West Coast. Do you think there's multiple of these species out there, just offshoots?
I believe that it is probably one species with different races, like humans. We're Homo sapiens sapien, and then we have the Caucasian and the Native Americans and the African Americans, and so on. And I think that's what it is. And if you look at the different races of humans, you will see a lot of noticeable differences in facial features, skin color, and things of that nature. So I do believe that there's a possibility that there is more of a, different races, in these creatures. Now, I can tell you that in my general area, from what I've spoken to, with witnesses, and my wife included, because she had a double sighting here several years ago, and I'll tell you about that here in just a minute. But for the most part, people in this area explain the facial features as looking either like a Neanderthal or a Native American. And I know that there are others that say that, they have, there are some with elongated, snouts, or, they have a caped nose versus a hooded, which would make them look more like a great ape. But for the most part, when I've spoken to people, the very first thing I ask them is, did you get a look at the face? Can you describe the face for me? And those in this general area, those two facial descriptions, the Neanderthal and the Native American, are what I have come up with the most here in this part of Ohio.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would tend to agree with you. I would definitely tend to agree with you. I don't get too many people from Ohio. I've had a few, but I can't say that I've spoken to too many witnesses that said it looked like a chimpanzee. And that's what I get mainly down in Texas. People who've seen them up close, they'll say the Down syndrome. And that's not a great description, but that's something witnesses have used in the past. But or they'll say it looked like a chimpanzee. And then it seems like the farther east I go, the more I get, it looked like a Native American, or it had features like a person, or the face looked like a person. And I just find that interesting, that there's such a huge jump. Like here in Washington State, a lot of people will say it looked like an ape. The face looked like an ape, except for with the human nose. Everyone describes the human nose, the hooded nose. But the facial features, people will say, it goes from ape to chimp, and then it seems like the farther east I go, the more you get the human. But tell us about your wife's encounter.
Okay, this was several years ago in July. My wife is a nurse, and she was working a day shift, and she was coming home from work one day. Now, this happened at 3:30 in the afternoon, right after she got off work. She was headed north on Route 45 coming out of Lisbon, Ohio. And she was coming down a hill that they call Ski Slope Hill near a small, very, very, very small area called Franklin Square. Now, this is, out in the country, and there's the Little Beaver Creek runs through there, and there's a lot of swampy area around there also. So she was coming down this hill, and all at once traffic stopped dead, and she saw this creature run in front of the vehicle that was directly in front of her. And as this creature ran across the road, it happened to look at my wife, not directly at her, but it looked in her direction, and she got a good look at the face, and that's when she said it looked like a Neanderthal. Now, what is really interesting about this is it stopped traffic dead. There was a pickup truck coming up the hill on the other side, and there was a bridge right there. What this thing did was it ran up across the road. It jumped over a guardrail on one side of the road, and then in just a bound or two, leaped over the guardrail on the other side of the road, and then it disappeared. And but it stopped traffic dead. And the car that was directly in front of my wife, they had a really good view of it, and it scared the holy bejesus, out of them, and they took off. They just really got out of there quick. But the pickup truck that was coming up the other side of the road kept pulling forward and backing up and pulling forward and backing up, to try and, get another glimpse of this thing. But by then it was already gone. But the thing of it was that right after the first one jumped across the road in front of the vehicle, was directly in front of my wife, about 250 feet or 300 feet further on down the road, another one ran across the road going in the same direction. So she actually had a double sighting, at the same time. And it was really quite amazing. Now, she didn't really get a very good look at the second one, but they were both the same color, a dark brown, long, shaggy hair. But the face on the first one, she said, looked just like a Neanderthal. But and then shortly after that, we tried to get people to come out and come to a meeting that we had, to discuss, what had happened there, and we couldn't get anybody to come out and talk about it. So
why do you think that is?
People are scared to death of being ridiculed, but I know a lot of people who've come to me who want to remain completely anonymous. They just don't want anybody to know who they are or where they are or anything else. They'll tell you their story, but you have to swear, that you'll keep everything anonymous with them because they're scared to death of being ridiculed. And so I'm almost certain that that's the reason no one ever, came forward when those two ran in front of my wife. None of the other drivers out there.
Have you had any violent encounters, or have you talked to any witnesses that have had violent encounters?
No. But, of course, you always have, people telling you stories of where they've had, rocks or sticks and things of that nature thrown at them, or they've been growled at. But I've never heard of anyone having a violent encounter where, a creature has actually come after them with any kind of ill intent. Now, I've had rocks, myself and a couple of my team members have had rocks thrown at us. We've had, we've heard, a lot of howls and screams and things of that nature. But on one occasion, we were up on top of a big hillside and, a wooded hillside. And up in this area there are a couple northern pecan trees, and the vegetation up there was extremely dense. And so we got back out of the thickest area there, up where the northern pecan trees were, and we were standing in a small clearing underneath a maple tree. And all of a sudden, Ray Gardner, who's our senior field researcher, saw something flying through the air, and it was coming from an extremely dense area of vegetation, and it was the bush was probably 6 feet tall, and it was so dense you couldn't see through it. But this thing was flying through the air, and it bounced off one of the limbs of the maple tree and came down and just cracked me in the back of the head. And it was really strange because, human instinct, he reached down and he picked it up, and it was wet. And it was shelled. So, I know that northern pecans don't fall out of maple trees, and they don't fly horizontally through the air. So what that was, I'll never know for sure, but we do have a pretty good idea. And the thing is, Ray and I both screwed up when that happened, because it was the very instant he picked it up off the ground, it was contaminated. So we couldn't even send that out for analysis. But that is probably the most violent thing that I've ever had happen, and that to me wasn't violent.
Yeah. No, and I tend to get a lot of my violent encounters, Oklahoma, Texas, Mississippi, a lot of those areas, they seem to have a whole different mentality about them. Like here in the Pacific Northwest, they can be violent, and I have had violent encounters. Witnesses have described violent encounters. I even had one guy that was attacked. But for the most part, I would say generally speaking, they'll come in, check you out, and then the moment they're seen, they generally will walk away, or they'll leave the area. But that's not always the case. I know I've had a lot of witnesses where that's not always the case. Do you think this is being covered up?
I think that there's probably a fair chance of that. Now, I know that there have been a lot of forest rangers and wildlife officers who have had sightings and encounters. And I know I have a couple friends who have been privy to a wildlife officer's manual. They didn't get to keep it, but they were able to see it, and it actually does tell a wildlife officer what to do, or how to react if they come across something like this. And of course, back in during the Vietnam War, now this isn't a Bigfoot, but it's the rock apes over in Vietnam. I know that there supposedly have been some of those creatures captured and brought back to the United States. And they say that there's probably some evidence in the Smithsonian somewhere. But, I'd say there might be a fair possibility that it's being covered up, because, when you stop to think of it, if they are really, brought out into the open, then that's going to mess up the logging industry and a lot of other things. And there goes millions of dollars down the tube and a lot of people out of jobs. So, because they're going to have to protect these things and have, like a refuge area. And so, a lot of the virgin trees and stuff that are being logged out, for the lumber industry is going to be, really, really damaged. So, I would say that there's probably a pretty good possibility that they're being covered up.
Have you taken any dogman reports from your area?
Well, I kind of, there have been a few people in this area who've mentioned the dogman, but as far as there being a whole lot of it, no, there's not been a whole lot of it. The dogman, I don't know if it's a case of mistaken identity. I don't know if there is another hominid out there with some type of elongated, face or snout. But some of the things that I've heard of the dogman, actually having the canine legs and things like that, and the canine feet, walking bipedally. I know the regular dogs, any dog can walk, for a certain distance on its hind legs, but for these creatures to be bipedal all the time, primarily bipedal, let me say that, you'd have to look at their pelvic structure, their entire vertebral column, the way their heads sit on their shoulders, because their necks and breathing tubes, windpipes would have to come up between their jaws in such a way as to allow the head to sit squarely on the shoulder. So I don't know if I really believe in them all that much.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of witnesses, and they're pretty consistent on what they're saying. I hear what you're saying though on the physical structure of them, and one of the things I had a kid on a couple weeks ago, and he had one of these things come up to his window, and he said, these things do have a neck, but it's a lot shorter, a lot more compressed. And I want to say he said the neck sat in a different spot. It almost than our neck. It sat almost in a forward position. It was a real awkward position where the neck sat. But he's, and I would imagine, as from a distance, they don't appear to have a neck. Right. But he was saying Sasquatch does, and he was saying it's very short, very compressed, and it almost sat forward on the shoulders, which would make a lot of sense, for them dropping down on all fours, getting up on two legs. You'd almost want that neck in a different spot.
Right. Right. Now, a lot of people will say that, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch doesn't have a neck. You hear people say that, but you have to also understand that the trapezoid muscles that have been described are massive, just massive trapezoid muscles, and they come up and attach to the back of the skull similar to that of a great ape. So it would make it appear as though it doesn't really have a neck, but it does.
Dan, I appreciate you being on tonight. Was there anything else you wanted to add before we close it out tonight?
I'm going to be at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference this year, and I am writing a series of children's books along with a couple other people. One is the published author of children's books named Scott Berry, and the illustrator is Rob Roy Menzies for our series of children's books. Now these children's books are, of course, on Bigfoot, and the series is called Sasquatch Mountain: The Search for the Magic Cloak. And we have as some of the characters in there. Ken Gerhardt is going to be in there. Dr. Meldrum is going to be in there, and the featured person who's going to be in there is Bob Gimlin. And so at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference this year, I'm going to actually be presenting Bob Gimlin with the original draft from our very first book. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope people come on out and check out that conference, because I'll tell you, Mark DeWorth puts on one heck of a conference there. Yeah,
I've heard that. I've always wanted to go out there and check the conference out. When does the book come out?
Well, they're finishing it up right now. Rob Roy is finishing things up, and Scott has a few things that he needs to finish up, and hopefully we'll have it out sometime this summer.
Let me know when it comes out. I'll have you back on to promote it, and that's it's good to get the kids involved. Every time I go to
Sure.
any sort of conference, I always try and bring some footcasts with me and give it to kids that are there that are interested in the subject. You got to pass it along to the next generation. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, Dan Baker, I appreciate you coming on. If you want to check out his Facebook group, it's the American Primate Exploration Ape. It's a group on Facebook. Cool group. They post some really good stuff on there. I highly recommend it if people go and go join that group. Dan, thanks for coming on. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you, Wes. I really appreciate it.
Five, four, three, two, one.
His mother actually was a veterinarian, and his mother and his father both worked for the state, Fish and Game. They worked for the Native Americans on the tribe. Anytime an animal got hit or an animal was injured, they would call his mom and dad out to take care of the animal, either put it down or knock it out so that they could help the injured animal. And one night they were called out to this large animal that got hit on the side of the road. And his mother describes it as being a half human, half gorilla. And she tried to knock the animal out. She estimated it weighed between 600 and 900 pounds. But they go into full description on what they saw and what they experienced. I hope you get a chance to check it out. Thanks again for being here tonight. Let's jump right into it. Randy, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
And if you would kind of start from the beginning, what part of the country did this take place? And if you would, for the audience, just kind of walk them right into the experiences you guys had on this property.
Well, what had happened was it was, I believe, around October of '97, where my wife's father got sick. We lived down in West Palm Beach, Florida at the time. They had bought property up in, it's a very small city called Interlaken, which is 30 minutes from Gainesville and about 45 minutes from Ocala. So it's kind of right in the middle there. We had gone up there many times to visit, and we liked the place. I mean, it was nice. So when we didn't hesitate, especially with him being sick, we knew. So my two kids were, well, they must have been 9 and 8 at the time. So the four of us packed up and went up there. We stayed with them probably maybe 4 or 5 months. We went looking around for properties to rent because it's a very rural place, a lot of dirt roads. They have like a McDonald's and I think a little 7-Eleven, and that's about it. So we came upon a property. We just happened to be driving back. It was my kids were already going to school at this time. It's an elementary school, and there's the main highway that runs. I'm going to say north and south is 315. So their elementary school was right off of 315. And we just decided to look back that way because it would be closest for us to get them to school. And we just ran into this property. They had signs out. It was 6 lots, all fenced in, double wide mobile home, which was perfect for us. The owner actually lived down here in West Palm, where I'm at right now, and we contacted him, and we had the property. We were moving in like within a couple of days. So the first incident happened about maybe a little close to a week after we had first moved in, and I was working at night. I was cleaning restaurants. I had my own business doing that. So I was usually out of the house. I had to wait till the restaurants closed. So I'd usually leave my house around 9, get home probably, could be anywhere from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m., depending on how busy I was. So one night I was coming home, and as I pulled up my dirt road where my house was, I saw 2 police cars outside of my house, and I freaked out because I didn't know what was going on. Back then, there were no cell phones, so I had no way anybody could have called me. So I jumped out of the car, and there were 2 police officers that were in my yard towards the back of my house with flashlights. And what had happened was something hit the side of my house. My wife described it as sounded like a truck ran into it. So she flipped, called the police. There was nothing that they could see, and what they thought was that it was a deer had run, maybe got confused, and hit the side of the house. They said it happens up there a lot, which, I never had anything like that in my life. I saw plenty of deer when I went up there, lived up there, but I never had any experiences with any deers before. So the next morning, I went out to look because we didn't have motion detector lights or anything because we had just moved in. there was one window on that side of the house, which was where my kids' room was. And there were two big indentations above the top of the window. So estimating it now, I would have to say the window to the top of the window had to be at least maybe 7 feet, because you've got the foundation of the mobile home, which is cement, which has got to be at least, I would think, 3 feet. And then the mobile home is above that. So I'm guessing somewhere around the top of the window would be at least 7 feet. And these two indentations were parallel to the top of the window. I didn't know anything of it, because I honestly had never gone out and looked at the outside of the house. For all I knew, they were already there. I was just looking to see if there was anything else that I could see, because I was expecting to see holes, because it's aluminum siding on the mobile home. So I was expecting to see holes from antlers or something that would tell me that that's what happened. But there was nothing.
What you mean when you say indentations? Do you mean like something had actually hit it, like with a fist, or what did it look like?
It looked to me like if you took, they were about the size of a softball, not a baseball, but a softball. And one was in deeper than the other. The one on the right-hand side pushed the aluminum siding in almost perfectly round. And the other one, the one on the left-hand side was not as pronounced as the one on the right. But you could still make it out that they were, that's where, whatever hit the house, that's where it was. That's where it happened. It had to be. The window never broke. It woke my kids up, and because they went screaming. But my wife and my bedroom was on the opposite side of the house. And she said it shook the entire house because she was in bed. So imagine what the kids were asleep and it hit their window. So we went, my wife's son, my stepson, came up there, and we went and got motion detector lights and put them on all four corners of the house, just for safety, just because you're so alone there. We had one neighbor across the street down a ways who was probably at the time, he had to be in the 70s. So, if anything, and the police there, it's like, forget it. You call the police, by the time they can even find your property, it's probably different now. But back then, there's so many different dirt roads. It's like you could get lost in there very easily. Anyway, my property, as I said, it was 6 lots, which is probably an acre and a quarter, I believe. But it was all fenced in. Back of the property, there was a dirt road that went completely around my property. The back end of my property was a swamp that ran kind of catty-corner to my property and then around behind my neighbor's house. Not a huge, I was just looking on Google Maps, and I think I found it finally. So I'm not going to say, I'll tell you what the address was, and then you can look at it later, because I really don't want to release that right now.
Yeah, you don't have to say it on the air.
Okay. So there were no incidents, nothing had happened. Everything, but we had 3 dogs. One of them was a huge mastiff, had to be 140 pounds, and they stayed outside. They slept on the front porch. They patrolled the property. Anybody came near our property, and those dogs were right out there. But it was very rarely. You had the mailman that came once a day, and then, that was really it, unless somebody was lost or, the neighbor went to the store and came back. You hardly ever saw any foot traffic or any cars going by our house, except for who lived there. If we saw a car we didn't recognize, then we knew, they're either lost or they shouldn't be where they're over here right now. So I think I'd say it was probably about maybe a month and a half after the house getting hit that we were out, we were barbecuing, and it was late, not real late, but like 9, 10 o'clock. And we heard, I can't describe the scream, except that it was so loud and went on for so long. It was almost like as it was happening, you were just waiting for it to end, and it just didn't. It just kept going. And as it reached its crescendo at the end, you could practically feel it in your stomach, because it went from a scream, a woman's scream, to almost like a bellow that was very, very deep. That's how, and it was like, if you ever been in a car that somebody has a huge, like a stereo with a really good bass to it, where you can feel it beating in your chest. That's what this reminded me of. And we called and I'm not sure if it was the sheriff's department or if it was like a county police, whatever. They didn't come out, but they had wildlife came out. And the guy came out like 3 days after this happened. And we explained everything to him, what happened, what it sounded like. And he said that it's possible it was a Florida panther. And the minute I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, because my kids were always playing outside, going around the property. But they hadn't had any reports of any panthers for like 12 years, he told us. He said, and I'm like, well, what else could it have been? And he's like, that's really the only thing that's going to make a noise you're describing. It could have been a bobcat. There's no coyotes or anything like that up there, and it definitely wasn't a dog. There's just no way. So he more or less gave us his card and said, if it happens again, call me. Well, it happened again and again and again. It was like clockwork for almost 2 weeks straight, between 9 and 10 o'clock every night. It got to the point I called him and called him and called him, and he never even came back out to investigate it. So my kids were forbidden to go outside unless I was out there with them. They couldn't leave our house to go to their friends unless we drove them there in the car. Because we were both petrified that it was a Florida panther or something that could kill somebody. So the noises stopped. Just all of a sudden one night, nothing. And then nothing at all. Nothing happened at all for probably, now we're in 98. So the next thing that happened was probably a good 3 or 4 months later, where my dogs started getting out. They were digging under the fence, and I would patch up the fence, and they'd go to a new spot and dig up another way and get out. They never really did anything. They just went around the neighborhood. They always came back. Well, they were gone one day, and I went out to see which way they went under the fence so I could go fix it again. And it was a chain link fence, probably 4 foot high, that went around the whole house. The top bar of one section of the fence was bent down almost in the shape of a V. When it came to a point, it was probably almost touching the ground. And those bars, I have them on a fence where I live right now. You can't bend those things by hand. It's impossible. Yeah. So I figured maybe something fell. There were no trees. There was nothing. We had no storms. And I know the dogs couldn't have done it. Even if they had tried to jump over the fence and landed on the top, there was just no way that bar was going to bend. So the only thing I thought of was maybe somebody's trying to case the house and to rob it. And this is like, if they could pull their car around the back of the house, no one would know they're there. Push the fence down, go in, steal the stuff, and go. I never thought anything other than that. The police came out again. By this time, they knew us very well. And they had no explanation for it either. There was just nothing that could have done that. I remember the one cop said something. I don't remember what he called it, but there's another city over a ways from us going towards Jacksonville that had some kind of sightings or a mythical creature throughout the years that they talked about. I don't know. It wasn't called a woolly booger, but it has some weird name that they associated with. I'm trying to think of the city. If I can remember it, I'll say it, and then maybe if anybody lives around that way that's listening, they may know what I'm talking about. But the cop made a comment like that, but I didn't know what he was talking about. In other words, it's a boogeyman or whatever. So the fence gets fixed. The dogs are still digging under the fence and getting out. We had an incident one night. We had all gone out to Walmart. The dogs would always stay up on the porch in the house, or right up on my front porch when we left. Unless somebody happened to go by, then they'd go charge the gate, and then they'd go right back. That's where they slept, everything. So we come home with our groceries, get out of the car. The dogs are not on the porch, so I'm thinking, oh, God, they got out again. And at this time, it's night, so there's no way I was going to go walk around looking for them. But I did. After we put the groceries away, I went out and I walked around the outside of the property with the flashlight, and they were all in the corner of the property, not sleeping, but they were like all shaking, especially when the big one. I mean, I thought maybe they had gotten poisoned or something had happened to them. Somebody had done something. I told you when I first talked to you that one of them had gotten shot by a neighbor, which was when we first moved in there. So that was kind of weird. They finally came around and came back up to the front of the house, but it took quite a while. I remember we gave them Benadryl. We gave each one of them a Benadryl tablet because we thought maybe they ate something up there. We had tons of water moccasins and diamondback rattlers up there. So we didn't know if there was a snake bite or what the heck they got into. But by the next day, they were fine. There was no signs of them being sick or anything. As we went on, the screams started again. But they were sporadic. You might hear it once a week, and then you wouldn't hear anything for a month. But whatever it was letting us know that it was there. So anyway, fast forward to probably must have been the summer or getting close to summer of '99. We had apple and orange trees on our property. I think we had 4 apple and 3 oranges, or it might be the other way around. And we would go out when they all were ripe. We'd make not a day of it, but the kids were young. They enjoyed it. We'd go out there with the ladder and we'd go picking fruit, bring it in. And so we had planned to go out and do it. They were just about ripe, and especially the apple tree. The apple tree was pretty tall, too. It was probably had to be at least 20 feet tall. So, and they were full. I went out there just checked to see if they were okay. They all looked like they were just about ready to be picked. So a couple of days later, we got our baskets and went out, and there was not one fruit on any tree. Not even, and there were none on the ground. They just vanished. And they were there because I saw them. And I'm thinking, well, how could this happen? I know that I don't think the neighbor would have come over. There's never any kids around our place except for my 2. And, it just was like, what the heck? So I went over to my neighbor. I wasn't great friends with him, but I was pretty good friends. He helped me fix my car a couple of times. And I went over and asked him if he had seen anybody around the property because all my fruit is gone. And he took me to the back of his house and pointed to where he had fruit trees. And he said, that's why I don't have any fruit trees anymore. And he left it at that, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But the fruit trees he did have, he must have taken a chainsaw to them and cut them down because they were still the base, the tiny stump sticking in the ground, but he just went out there and cut them down completely. But I just blew it off as well. He's in his 70s. Maybe he's a little senile and he doesn't know, maybe he just doesn't know what he's talking about. But that's where that ended. There was really nothing I could do. Wasn't going to call the police to tell them my fruit is gone. I mean, what I'm sure they wouldn't have rushed out to my house. They had been to my house so many times to begin with, they probably were thinking we were all crazy, which we weren't. It was just we were in a situation we didn't know how to go about getting anything done. I never knew back then about any kind of skunk apes. I had seen the original Patterson video in the movies when I was a kid, but I thought that was generally a Northwest, Oregon, Washington, upstate California type of thing. Never heard of anything down here at all. So that never even entered my mind. I was more or less worried about, like I said, that it was a panther. So as we entered fall of 99, everything was very, very quiet. There was no problems at all. The only problems that we did have, which I just thought was minor, but thinking back on it now, it may not have been, was our motion detector lights came on all the time. And I mean, if you're familiar with that, we had on the four corners of the house. So two are at the front of the property, two are at the back of the property. The dogs are in the front. How do the back ones go off? So I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just the lights are malfunctioning. Maybe if the trees blow in the wind, it might set them up. There's a million different things that could cause it, but they did a lot. And one of them was where my bedroom was. And it would wake me up because it was right there, and they were really, really bright. I'd get up, look out the window. There's never anything there. So I just blew that off as just malfunctioning motion detectors. But anyway, the culmination of the whole thing happened in February of, I believe it was either January or February of 2000. It was a Friday evening. It was very cold. Up there, when it goes down, it can get down there. But it was probably in the low 30s that night. It gets cold up there during the winter. Not down here where I'm living now. That never happens, but up there it does. And it was a Friday night. I was off. My kids had two of their friends spending the night, so they all decided they were going to go out and walk around the outside of the property on the dirt road with flashlights and just play around. And nothing had been happening. And, my wife and I said, all right, we had our windows. A couple of the windows were open because we loved it when it was cold. So we'd be able to hear them and see them. But I decided that I was going to go out and scare them. So as they were getting ready to go, I ducked out the back door. Okay, I didn't have a flashlight with me or anything because I knew exactly what I was going to do. I ran through the back of my property, got to the fence, jumped over the fence, and I could hear them leaving the house, coming out my front gate. So I ran across the dirt road, and there's trees there across the dirt road, all down that road. There's trees everywhere. But as I'm running full speed to hide by a tree, I ran full speed into something that knocked me back. It wasn't like hitting a wall, but it was just like very hard to describe. I knew I didn't hit a tree because I wasn't running in that direction. I was actually looking as I was running, and it just all of a sudden happened, and I flew back and landed on my ass. And I was stunned. I've had concussions in my life from sports. And this was kind of on that, where your head is just like, you can't get your bearings right away. But as I started to get my bearings and was able to look up, there's this thing standing there. And the feeling that I got, besides utter fear that I'm about to die, was my kids are coming. But I could not move. The size of this thing and being that close to me, I mean, it couldn't have been more than 2 feet away from me at this point. It had one arm holding on to the top, not the top, but pretty high up on the tree, and it just glared at me. Its mouth never moved. It never showed its teeth. It had kind of human characteristics facial-wise. But, this whole thing probably lasted 2 minutes if somebody had timed it. It felt like it was 3 hours. But in that time, I could see almost every detail because it was a full moon. It looked to me like it had mange, like it was missing a lot of hair it should have had, and there were scabs. The longest part of its hair hung from its shoulders, which were so wide, they had to be at least 5 feet. Had to be 5 feet wide, the shoulders. Came down to a very slim waist, but the legs were huge. The thighs, the only thing I didn't look at was its feet. Its thighs and calves were just like double the size of mine. I'm not a huge guy, but I'm around 200 pounds, 5'9", and my legs are actually pretty good, pretty big, but this thing was twice of mine. And its biceps and the length of its arms was that was, I think the most thing I was scared was that it was going to reach over and grab me, which a normal human wouldn't be able to do at that distance. But he could have grabbed me very easily and just broke my neck. Well, I'm saying I'm not even 100% sure. Was it he? Because I didn't look at that part. Or the way it was turned, I couldn't actually tell. I didn't see breasts, but the head, it had no neck. The back of its head had a little bit of hair, but it was almost like it was balding, where it was almost a grayish color to the skin, all the way down into the face. And the bottoms of the hands were grayish. The hair that was on its body was like a reddish brown. But like I said, it was very sporadic. It had to have had some kind of mange, because we had found puppies that somebody had abandoned a few months before this happened, and they all had mange. And they looked, that's the first thing it reminded me of, because it's like very bunch of scabs, and it almost looks like the skin is like been scratched raw, and where it becomes a big scab. But this was the majority of its body. Its chest, there wasn't. Its chest was big, but it also had that grayish tone to it.
How tall do you think the creature was?
Well, those trees there, I'm not a tree expert. I have some mango trees right here. When I was talking the other day, I was outside and I was looking at trying to compare the mango trees to the trees that were up there. Those were bigger around. I have a huge mango tree in my front yard, but these were more, they had to be maybe 12 inches around, but they were all spaced out all over the place up there. But it looked to me, with his hand grabbing the tree, that it had to be like his hand was reaching up possibly 10 feet. So you would have to put this thing in between, somewhere around 7 foot. I know it was definitely bigger than I was. There was just no question about that. And as I said, the whole thing probably was over, and it might have even been less than 2 minutes. I'm just guessing on that part. But it felt like it went on forever, and I was waiting for it to just decide what it was going to do, looking straight into its eyes and trying to determine what it was thinking, or, so if it was going to make a lunge for me, I could try to move, even though I pissed my pants when I saw this thing. And I'm not lying. That's the truth. This thing scared me. I've never had a scare like this or that in my life, and I hope to God I never do. But I could hear the kids coming, and that's the only thing that kept my mind clear, because if if I was just there and I didn't have something else to try to figure a way out of this, I mean, who knows what would have happened. But I may have flinched or moved as I heard the kids getting closer, and then it just gracefully, as it was already holding the tree, one of the trees, it reached over and grabbed another, and it's almost like it paralleled by grabbing the trees right back off into the swamp. I even heard it go into the water. So, but it was just so graceful. I mean, it was like if you'd see a gymnast in the Olympics, the way it just, like it knew, or that's how it got through those trees, like it was used to it. When I heard it go in the water was when I could finally move. And like the first thing I had to do was get the kids. And I got up, went out on the dirt road, and they were coming. I could see the flashlights, and they were right down by the swamp. And I started yelling, "Get in the house, get in the house." And they all got scared. They thought I was joking at first, and I said, "I'm not kidding. Get in the house." Well, they ran back up on the porch. I was right behind them, and as I was closing the gate, they were already on the front porch. They could smell me. Had to be 30 feet away from them. And the first thing they said was, "What is that smell?" I didn't even notice it until they said that. And when I did, I said, there's a skunk over there, and they could have rabies. I don't want you guys out. But my wife came out at this point, and the smell, I didn't go up on the front porch because it was starting to it was making my eyes water. My wife, when she opened the door, she immediately smelled it. I didn't want to tell her what happened. I just said, "I think I got sprayed by a skunk." I told her I was going to scare the kids. And anyway, she made me take my clothes off outside. I went around the back, took my clothes off, rinsed myself off with the hose, even though it was freezing outside. Couldn't get it off of me. Went in the house and was in the shower for about an hour trying to get this smell off of me. And I couldn't get it off of me. It lasted probably for 3 days. My wife was ready to make me sleep in the car. That's how bad it was. I had to bag up my clothes, and I didn't want to put them in our garbage because they only picked up our garbage once a week. And I didn't want it to be, because it was like I don't know if you're familiar with septic systems. We had ours go bad out when we lived at that house. And this was like the smell of a dump, if you've ever driven by one or been near one, where it has like a sweet kind of, it's a horrible smell, but there's something about it. It kind of smells kind of sweet. And also mixed with bad body odor. Like somebody hadn't, or probably maybe never had used deodorant, or and is out sweating for days on end. And I've smelled some people like that in my life. So, but combine the two, and then that it just didn't come off of me. It was, and the worst part about it is, I guess when I hit it, I was running head on, so it was like from my eyebrows all down to my legs. And so I was constantly smelling it. I never got used to the smell, but as you can't, a lot of times with smells you can, because I have dogs in my house now, and I have people come over and they'll say, "I can smell your dogs." I don't smell them because I'm used to it. I could never get used to this smell. There's no way. Never smelled anything like it, and I've never smelled anything like it since that's happened. We never smelled that when we lived up there, because I would have noticed it, or somebody would have noticed it, because it's just horrible. But anyway, after this happened, I'd say maybe 10 days to maybe possibly 2 weeks, we were out of there. I wouldn't stay there. Not after that. We moved back down here. And I quit my job up there. And my wife, I never told her what happened. My kids don't know what happened to this day. But I just said, that's it, we're done. I can't work up here anymore. We're not going to be able to live here. We can come up and visit your dad, but we're leaving. So we did. We packed up, and I could not wait to drive away from that property. I never looked back. I've never been back since then. And I probably, even though now that I know more about what it was and I'm intrigued by it, I'd like to go and do like research. I mean, but not up there. I would go down here because there's a lot of places that there's sightings up down here too. But I mean, every picture I've ever seen or video, and I've watched hundreds of them and seen hundreds of pictures. There's not one of them that comes close to what this thing looked like. Not one of them. Now, whether this thing was just something nobody knew about, except for, like my neighbor, and maybe there was only one, I don't know. But I do know that I've read another report, which is on the BFRO. If you look under Florida sightings, there's one that happened to another family, which was not very far from where we lived. And it was like a bunch of occurrences over a certain amount of years. And I'm pretty sure I even know where the property is, because it was only like not even 10, 15 minutes from our house. It's a very, very, not a well-known, but they have a certain type of tree in their yard, a huge tree that looks like a hand. And that's what they described in the report that I read. So that's why I'm thinking that house was not even 10 minutes from our house. And plus we were 30 minutes from the Ocala National Forest. But I think that this thing was exclusive to where we lived. I think that when we moved in, because nobody had lived in our house for several years. So I guess it had its free reign. It could take all the fruit it wanted to. I mean, not that there was anything else there it could do, and nobody bothered it because there was nobody there. If the neighbor must have known about it, he cut his trees down and maybe solved the problem right there.
When you were looking at the face of this creature, how would you describe it? Would you describe it more of a non-human primate, or would you describe it more of a human looking more human? How would you place it? I mean, you got a up-close personal encounter with this thing.
It looked like a crossbreed, if there's such a thing, of a human and an ape. It had the ape characteristic. It had the no neck. The head wasn't, it didn't come up into a cone like I've seen some of them. It almost looked like a bald man, an older man. But I've worked at hospitals before, and I've been in morgues, and the color of its skin, which I could see plenty of because it was missing so much hair, was a dead gray color. There was no mistaking. The moon was not making it look any different. Its eyes were black. There was no shine. Well, because the moon was behind it. There was no, they might have been colored, but they looked black to me, or dark brown. The nose was flat, almost like it was like somebody had broken a nose where it was pushed in. And the mouth, it never opened its mouth. It never even moved its mouth the entire time. But it had a very long mouth line, but thin lips. The lips were very, very, very thin, but the mouth was, mine, maybe 4 or 5 inches long. This thing was, had to be. Almost reminded me of the Joker on Batman as far as how wide the mouth was. But I never saw its teeth. The ears there was some hair that was around the ears, so I couldn't really make out what they looked like. But the thing that got, I think if it had ever snarled at me or I don't even want to tell you what I would have done because I already pissed my pants. There's only one other thing I could have done at that point. But the thing that really got me was the shoulder length and the arms and the legs. I mean, you don't see something that big. The only thing I can equate it to is when I went to my first NBA game. Actually, yeah, seeing them courtside and how big they really are compared to you. But I also was in the bathroom once. I used to live up in Boston. I was in the bathroom at a restaurant, and one of the Boston Celtics came in as I was going to the bathroom and stood right next to me. And it's, it's not something you see every day, a human being that's 7 foot tall. You just don't. But it, height-wise, and the shoulder width, and the arm length, and the tree trunk legs, this thing was definitely healthy. I can say that much. But it had that grayish tone to its skin, which was almost like a person that's dead. That's the color that it was. And then it had the brownish auburn hair sporadically around on its body. So,
from the pictures you've seen and the videos you've seen, what is it that they don't have right from what you saw?
Well, if you know, which I'm sure you do, the famous skunk ape pictures that the lady supposedly took on her property. They've been I've seen them show them on TV and everything. I used to think that was real because I was like, how could somebody fake that? It just looked real to me. This looked nothing like that. That's why I thought, you know what, that thing really almost looked like an orangutan to me. Whereas this thing was like a human and some type of ape combined to look this way. I've never seen anything online, no videos, nothing that comes close to what I saw. It's just, I kind of consider myself privileged that I was able to see as the weeks and the months went by, I think of it as almost like a religious experience. As scared as I was, to be in that position and to have something like that happen to you it's almost like a miracle, where I look at it now that I believe in these things. There's so many people out there. I see it every day. I belong to a bunch of Bigfoot groups on Facebook, and there's so much turmoil. There's so much drama. This person hates that person. This one's a hoaxer. This one's, I don't even get involved in it. I like to keep up with it. There's new videos and new sightings. I started listening to your show a couple weeks ago, and I really enjoy it. But I don't want to get involved in the drama part of it. I think that's crazy. These things are out there. I swear to God this happened to me. And like I said, I consider myself privileged that I had this happen. I kind of wish I had a sighting where it was further away from me and I could see it and justify what I saw, and that would be the end of it. I don't like the way mine happened because it scared the crap out of me. I don't know how I would have reacted if I saw this thing 20 feet away from me. But running into it at full speed and then it being that close to me, there's just there's nothing like that will ever happen to me again in my life.
Yeah, no, I hear you. A lot of people find Jesus. A lot of atheists find Jesus and find prayer in moments like this when they're face to face with these things. It's
well, I think I said this to you the other day. I guess basically all humans are the same. When we're faced with a crisis situation, they always say it's fight or flight, whatever. That didn't apply to this because, like I said, if it had flinched, I don't think I still could have got away or even attempted to because I was frozen with fear. Maybe it would be different if it happened to somebody else. If I had a weapon, which I never kept guns on my property because of the kids, I don't even think I would have been able to use it. As scared as I was, there's no way. Plus, if I did have a weapon and shot it, I probably wouldn't. I would have felt horrible because it would have been like shooting a person. That's the way that I look at it. It's not. They're not far off from us. They're just maybe there's different types around the world, but I think they're all basically the same, except some might look different than others a little bit. I know that their hair color varies from region to region, from what I've seen. This is not the first time that I had heard about the hair color, the one that I saw down here. I've read reports where they've almost said the same color. Never saw or read a report where they said they had gray skin tone.
Yeah, no, I've talked to many witnesses that have described that gray skin tone. You know what's...
Have you? I've never seen it. I've never...
Yeah.
I've always heard it as... if you... Like, when you watch the Patterson video, as it's walking away, after it does its turn, if you look at the bottom of its feet... Now, this is in the colorized version. I'm sure you've probably seen that, too.
Yeah.
But the color of the soles of its feet were the same color as the skin on this one, which was a gray... Like, the only thing I can describe it as a dead gray color. So,
yeah, and I'll send you some links of some shows I've done recently. A lot of the witnesses I've had on recently describe that gray color skin, and it's an interesting encounter. You ran full speed into this thing, and it didn't really flinch one bit.
It never moved. It never moved. When I immediately thought I hit a tree. That was all that I could have done. But then, my mind was like all scrambled, and I'm thinking I would have seen the tree because I was looking straight ahead. So it's almost like it must have walked out in front of me as I was running. Because I don't think I was knocked out. I more or less had no bearings. My head was spinning because of the force of me hitting it. But when I finally was able to look up, it had its hand already on the tree. It was already holding the tree and was just looking at me. It never moved until a minute or however long it was. Maybe it heard the kids because all of a sudden it just paralleled through the trees back into the swamp. I started thinking maybe they live in the water. Because we had gone over there by the swamp a couple of times to go fishing, but there's so many water moccasins, I would say, forget it. This is not worth it. I'm not getting bit by a poisonous snake. There's hundreds of them. So I don't know how these things get around it with the snakes, but I think it did not. It was in tip-top shape, and so this was 1999 or 2000. I'm sorry. February of 2000. So you're talking a little over 16 years ago. It may still be there. If that's where its home is. And I've contacted a couple of people that do research here in Florida and never heard anything back. So
yeah, it's interesting too. The other thing you said about its face, there's something about their face and the way they look. I've talked to many hunters who've had them in the scope of their rifle, where they could have pulled the trigger and had a perfect headshot. And actually, I take that back. I've probably talked to about 3 hunters, maybe 4. And what's interesting is every one of those hunters I spoke to, I asked them, why didn't you pull the trigger? And there's a couple different reasons. One is they, really wasn't threatening them. But the other thing I thought was fascinating when I spoke to them is they said there was something about the face. It wasn't human, but it had human characteristics. So when they were looking at it, they almost felt like, I can't pull the trigger. This wouldn't be the right thing to do. And despite what people think, most hunters are actually very ethical people. But they've all said the same thing. I felt like I was like killing a person, even though deep down, as you talk to them, you interview them, you realize, and even they realize it's not a person, but there's human characteristic traits about what they're seeing to where it's difficult for them to pull the trigger.
I wish that I had a better view of its eyes. But as I said, the moon was behind it. So the only thing that I had, the night sky was still lit up from it being a full moon, but I couldn't, the eyes just looked black to me. And I know if I had a better view of them, then you can tell from me reading other reports that you can just see intelligence when they look at you. And I wish that happened, but it didn't. They just looked black to me. And the face was emotionless. Not one wrinkle moved. The nose didn't sniff. The eyes didn't blink. The eyes looked like they were wide open, though. I never noticed them blink at all. But they looked just black to me. And the mouth never moved. The whole body was almost like it looked like a statue, just standing there, perfectly still. And the only thing, as I said, was I think it may have heard or must have heard my kids coming. And they had flashlights, and unless it caught one of the beams of the flashlight out of the corner of its eye, I couldn't tell if it was looking at all. It wasn't moving. But then all of a sudden, it just left. It just went off like it about its own business. You know, it could have killed me. I have no question that thing could have killed me if it wanted to. And it could have killed my kids. It could have killed everybody that lived in the whole area if it really wanted to. And, you know, unless somebody shot it and killed it. But I think it was just, that's where it lived. We moved in, and maybe it bothered it because it had free reign, you know, with the fruit trees in our yard, and nobody was living there except for the neighbor across from us. He probably knew about it, cut his trees down, so it probably never even bothered him. So, you know, we were encroaching on its home when we moved in, and I guess maybe it was telling us, hey, I was here before you were.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, too, the Sasquatch's behavior. You know, most wild animals, while you'll rarely ever run into something like that, you know, most grizzly bears, deer, they're gone. They hear you coming and they're gone. But running into it and then having it just stand there and look at you, you know, like you're nothing. I mean, you didn't startle it, you didn't scare it, you don't terrify this thing one bit. And then to hear the kids coming up, and then it turns and just kind of walks off. It doesn't run off. It wasn't like a flash, you know.
It didn't just walk off. No, that's not what it did. It was grabbing the trees and gliding through the trees. Its feet were off the ground. It was using the trees to get to where it was going. That's how it did it. It didn't walk. I know that for a fact. I never really paid much attention to the feet, but I could tell they weren't touching the ground. It was so graceful. I've seen videos of other, you know, monkeys, chimpanzees, whatever, when they go from tree to tree, it's very graceful. There's no, you know, they don't usually grab. They just go along with the way it was. That's what this did. It never touched the ground until, and maybe it did as it got further away from me. I couldn't see anymore. But that's how it got out of where it was.
That's really interesting. So it was actually hanging on the trees from one tree to the next.
Yep. It already had its hand on the one and never moved from that. That stayed there. And as it turned, let me see that. It had its right hand up on the tree in front of me. That's the one that never moved. When it decided to just go, it reached with the left arm and grabbed a tree adjacent to that one and then just glided right through. And then I did hear it splash into the water. And then that was it. But I've never read anything about them doing that before either. So it may have just done it because maybe it was a spur of the moment thing, or, I mean, there's no telling now.
Well, I definitely do get reports of them in trees. Did you ever tell your wife what really happened that night?
No. She has her suspicions that something happened there because my demeanor and everything changed after that night. I wasn't the same person I was before it happened. I was just a mess as far as like anxiety, and I probably should have gone to a doctor, because I just was almost to the point where I wanted to get in the car and just leave all the stuff there and go. I wasn't even concerned with any of my belongings. I just didn't want to be there because I didn't know what this thing really was capable of. And I didn't want anything to happen to my kids or my wife. And, there's no telling what could have. I mean, like I've said it 100 times, it could have killed me. Like nothing. Could have snapped my neck. No one would have ever known what happened to me, except that something happened and I died in the woods behind my house. Nobody would have ever said, well, maybe it was a skunk ape or whatever you want to call it. That would be the last thing anybody would think of. They'd probably just think I ran into a tree and broke my neck. That was it. So
this must have haunted you for the last 16 years.
It has. But as I said, it's almost gotten to the point where it's like I consider myself honored to have had that happen to me, because it doesn't happen to everybody. There's people that are out in the field for years and years and years, and maybe they might hear wood knocks, or maybe they may find some hair, maybe they may hear audio of them, yelling, whatever. But seeing one, that's the true privilege. I wouldn't want. I would love to see another one, but not like I saw mine. I'd love to be able to go out in the field and see them and video it, and that would be just great. But far away from me, because I wouldn't want to be that close to. That's the only bad part about the whole experience. I wish I had seen it before that and had known that something was there that I couldn't explain. I might never have done what I did. I would never have taken that chance if I knew something like that was out there. But they have black bears up there. That never even crossed my mind. Maybe there's a bear over here, because our garbage never got, knocked over. But the wildlife that we did have, when we first moved in, I remember like the first or second night we had to go out, and as we were coming home on the dirt roads, it was pitch black. You had to have your high beams on. God forbid anybody ever walked out, because you'd hit them. There's no way you wouldn't. But they're here as I'm taking the corner. There's 6 or 7 deer just standing on the dirt road. They didn't move. They didn't even jump or anything. I stopped, and they just went on their way. But I never saw another deer there the whole time we were there. We used to have raccoons. Never saw any raccoons. They would go up in our trees. Raccoons just disappeared. And especially at night when we would hear the screams, because a lot of crickets and noise out there at night, everything would stop right before the scream. You wouldn't hear nothing. You couldn't even hear a pin drop. Just dead silence, and then the scream would come. And now I know where it came from. It had to be, because I wish if the technology that they have now was available to me back then, and I could have recorded the scream, who knows what. I wish. I never saw footprints, and we had. It was a very sandy dirt roads, and my whole front yard was trees and sand. Hardly any grass. That's just the way the terrain is up there. The backyard had spots of grass, but it was still very sandy. But I never noticed any footprints. I was never really looking for any footprints. So even when I found the fence the way I found it, there was nothing around it. There were no footprints. There was like nothing had disturbed the whole area where the fence was pushed out.
Yeah, I've talked to guys who have looked into this for years, never had an encounter, always believed that this thing was real, and then they have an encounter, and the moment they see it, it's kind of like, holy crap, this is real. Even though they spent the last 20 years realizing that this is real.
It's because there's so many people out there that don't believe in it. And it's almost like when you say, I believe in it, nine out of 10 people are going to ridicule you and say, "Oh, you're crazy. There's no such thing. This is just made up." They're not the general public, and with the shows that they put on TV, Finding Bigfoot, Mountain Monsters. I mean, as much as I love to see Bigfoot or Sasquatch out in the public eye, I would much rather watch a documentary than those shows, because they get to the point where they're just comical, and it makes all these people that dedicate their lives, and there's many. You got your weekend warriors, and then you got guys that stay out in the field a long time looking for this, and it makes them look like they're crazy, and they're not. I know what I saw. I know what I ran into, and there's nothing out there like it. There has to be more. You've got all these people that do see these things. The only thing is, as they say, well, they never find a body. Well, who knows? Maybe they bury their bodies. They're intelligent. There's no telling what they could do.
I'm honored that you come on and share the encounter with me, Randy. So thank you so much for...
No, I appreciate being able to tell it. I really do. It makes me feel a lot better that I could get it out there.
Yeah, and it's terrifying. You definitely had things leading up to your encounter, and I'm sure it was one of those moments of, oh, that's what all this has been. It's been this thing, instead of a panther, instead of a, homeless guy on the back of your property, instead of a bear. I'm sure there was that moment where you were kind of like, oh, that's what this thing is.
Oh, yeah. You'd be surprised how your mind goes when you finally figure out what's been going on for over, like a year and a half. If it had been a bear, well, things might have turned out differently. I don't know. People get mauled by black bears a lot. So I don't think I would have wanted to run into one of them either. But I never saw any bears up there. I'm sure there are, but never. This thing, I would be willing to bet, is still there. And, you could go up there. Anybody that's listening to this now that knows the general area, and scope it out, and I guarantee you're going to find something there. I mean, I don't think it would have moved on. I think that's its home. It's like it's a swamp, but when you look at it on Google Maps, it looks like two separate swamps, but it's actually one. The only bad thing about it, like I said, is the snakes. I mean, you got to be really, really careful getting around those things, because they are extremely aggressive, the water moccasins up there. Never ran into any diamondbacks, but the water moccasins are horrible. Really bad.
Yeah, I've heard that. Well, Randy, I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Wes. We are now friends, and I will continue to listen to you guys.
Thanks, man.